David Letterman's hand froze in midair. Paul Schaefer pulled his fingers off the piano keys. 200 people in Studio 6A held their breath. Sitting across from him was Frank Sinatra, Hollywood's untouchable, the mob's friend, the Kennedys' confidant, the greatest vocal genius of the 20th century. And now, on that cold February night in 1984, live on air, tears were streaming from those legendary eyes. Letterman was a 30-year-old kid. Sinatra was a 68-year-old imp. But what happened in the next 60 seconds would change late-night television forever. This moment was never broadcast again. It was February 14, 1984, Valentine's Day. Late Night with David Letterman was in its third season on NBC, and the show had become appointment television for insomniacs and college students across America. Studio 6A in Rockefeller Center buzzed with its usual nervous energy. The wood-paneled wall, the retro desk, the New York skyline glowing softly through tall windows, everything was exactly as it should be. David Letterman, 37 years old, sat behind his desk with that familiar half-smirk, his curly brown hair slightly disheveled, his tie loosened just enough to look approachable but not unprofessional. Paul Schaefer sat at his keyboard, ready to punctuate every joke with a musical sting. The audience was warmed up, ready to laugh. But tonight was different. Tonight, Frank Sinatra was the guest. The booking had taken 6 months. Sinatra didn't do late-night talk show. He didn't need to. He was Francis Albert Sinatra, chairman of the board, the voice, old blue eyes. He'd sung for president, married movie stars, allegedly had ties that went deeper than anyone dared to investigate. At 68, he was still selling out arenas, still commanding respect, still dangerous in ways most entertainers could never imagine. Dave's producers had warned him, don't ask about the mob, don't ask about Ava Gardner, don't ask about JFK. Keep it light, keep it safe. Sinatra's people had made it clear one wrong question, and the interview was over. The monologue went smooth. Dave hit his mark. Paul played the perfect psych. The audience ate it up. And then came the moment. Ladies and gentlemen, Dave said, his voice carrying that Midwestern earnestness he could never quite hide. This next guest needs no introduction, but I'm going to give him one anyway because, frankly, I'm terrified not. The audience laughed. He's sold over 150 million records. He's won 11 Grammys, an Oscar, and the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He's been called the greatest singer of the 20th century. And if you don't agree, he might send someone to explain it to you. Bigger laugh. Please welcome Mr. Frank Sinatra. The audience bloated. Paul's band launched in New York, New York. Not the whole song, just enough to set the mood. And then Frank walked out. He moved like royalty. Navy blue suit, perfectly tailored. White pocket square. That famous fedora left backstage. His face was weathered now, the sharp angles softened by age. But those ice blue eyes still cut through everything. Dave stood, shook his hand, genuinely starstruck. Frank sat down in the guest chair, adjusted his cuff, and smiled that smile, the one that said, I've seen everything, kid, and you don't scare me. Mr. Sinatra, thank you for being here. Call me Frank, and you're welcome. Though I gotta say, this time slot, you know most of my audience is a spy now. The audience loved it. Dave grinned, relieved. This was going well. They talked about the old Dave. Dave asked about the Rat Pack, and Frank told a story about Dean Martin forgetting the lyrics to a song mid-concert and just making up gibberish that somehow rhymed. They talked about his upcoming tour. They talked about his favorite bourbon. Everything was safe. Everything was controlled. Everything was exactly what the producers wanted. And then Dave made a mistake. Frank, he said, leaning forward slightly, you've been doing this for nearly 50 years. You've seen everything, done everything. What keeps you going? What do you still want that you don't have? It was an innocent question, a good question even, the kind of question that should have led to some wisdom about legacy or artist. But Frank's face changed. The smile faded. The easy charisma drained. He looked down at his hands, those famous hands that had held microphone and cocktail glass, and the hands of women whose names made headlines. The studio went quiet, not the planned quiet of a setup, the real quiet, the uncomfortable quiet. Dave glanced at Paul. Paul's eyes widened slightly. Something was happening. Frank looked back up, and his eyes were glassy. You want to know what I still want? Frank's voice was different, softer, vulnerable. I want my daughter to talk to me again. What happened next would shatter Frank Sinatra's carefully constructed armor on live television. Dave froze. This wasn't in a pre-interview. This wasn't approved. This was real. Frank, Dave said carefully. We don't have— No, Frank interrupted. You asked? I'm answering. Paul Schaefer slowly lifted his hands off the keyboard, as if any sound might break the moment. Frank continued. Nance, my oldest, she's 43 now. Beautiful girl. Beautiful woman. Looks like her mother. He paused, His jaw tightened. I wasn't there, Dave. I mean, I was there physically, sure. Birthdays, graduation, the big stuff. But I wasn't there. You know what I mean? Dave nodded slowly. The audience was completely still. I was on the road. Always on the road. New York, Vegas, London, Tokyo. Singing for strangers. Making them feel something. And my own kid? I didn't even know her favorite color. Frank's voice cracked. Just slightly. But it cracked. She wrote me a letter last. You know what it said? It said, Dad, I grew up watching you make millions of people feel loved. But I never felt like one of them. The tears came. Not dramatic. Not showy. Just real. Just two streams down the face of the toughest man in showbiz. Dave did something then that no one expected. Something his producers would later scream about. Something that broke every rule of late-night television. He stood up from behind his desk. Paul's mouth opened. The cameras didn't know where to go. The audience held its breath. Dave walked around the desk, past the guest chair, and sat down on the edge of the stage right next to Frank's chair. Not in front of him. Not towering over him. Next to him. Like a friend. Frank, Dave said quietly, his own voice thick now. I'm 37 years old. I work 80 hours a week on this show. I have a girlfriend I barely see. I have a mom in Indiana I call once a month if lucky. He looked directly at Frank. I'm turning in, and you're telling me it's not worth it. The sentence Frank said next would freeze the blood of everyone in that studio. Frank looked at Dave, really looked at him, and then he said the words that would haunt Dave Letterman for the rest of his career. Kid, I've got 11 Grammys on a shelf in my house. You know what I'd trade them all for? One afternoon. Just one afternoon where my daughter looks at me and doesn't see Frank Sinatra, where she just sees her dad. The studio was dead silent. But I can't get that back. The time's gone. You still have time. Paul Schaefer, sitting at his piano, had tears running down his face. The band behind him, grown men, hardened session musicians, were staring at the floor. Dave didn't say anything. What could he say? Frank wiped his eyes with his pocket square, that white square that had been perfectly folded, now damp and crumpled. I'm sorry, Frank said, attempting a laugh. Some Valentine's Day guest I turned out to be. Dave shook his head. Don't apologize. Thank you. I mean that. Thank you. Frank nodded. They sat there for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 10 seconds. Then Paul, God bless Paul Schaefer, began to play. Softly, so softly you almost couldn't hear it at first. It was The Way You Look Tonight, one of Frank's songs, but played like a lullaby, like a prayer. Frank closed his eyes and listened. When he opened them, he looked at the audience. Can I tell you folks something? He said. All of you out there watching, wherever you are, if there's someone you love, someone you haven't called, someone you've been too busy for, call them tonight. Don't wait until you're an old man sitting on a talk show, crying like a fool. The audience began to applaud, not the wild applause of entertainment, the slow, respectful applause of witnessing something sacred. Dave stood, helped Frank to his feet. They shook hands. No, not shook, they embraced. A real embrace. Frank Sinatra and David Letterman, two men from completely different worlds, holding onto each other like shipwreck survivors. We'll be right back, Dave said to the camera, his voice barely steady. They cut to commercial, but the real story was just about to reveal itself. What the cameras didn't show was what happened during the commercial break. Frank stood up, straightened his tie, wiped his face one more time. Dave walked him to the side of the stage. The audience was silent, unsure if they should applaud or stay quiet. Frank turned to Dave and said something that only Dave could hear. I'm going to call her tonight when I get back to the hotel. I'm going to call Nancy. Dave nodded. Good. That's good, Frank. And you, Frank said, pointing at Dave with that finger that had pointed at presidents and gangsters. You call your mother tonight. Don't be like Dave's smile. I will. The show came back from commercial. Dave didn't bring out another guest. He didn't do a comedy bit. He just sat at his desk and talked to the camera. Folks, I don't know what to say after that. Frank Sinatra just taught me something about life that I wish I'd learned 20 years ago. Maybe you learned it too. I hope so. He paused. We're not going to do the rest of the show tonight. We're just going to end here, because some things are more important than comedy. Some things are more important than television. He looked directly into the camera. Go call someone you love right now. I'm serious. We'll still be here tomorrow, but they might not be. Paul played them out. Not the usual high-energy theme. Something softer. Something from Frank's catalog. In the wee small hours of the morning, the credits rolled over a shot of Dave sitting at his desk, the phone in his hand. And then, 20 years later, the truth finally came out. NBC never re-aired that episode. The network called it too depressing for late night. They buried it. For years, people who remembered it wondered if they'd imagined. There was no YouTube in 1984, no social media, no way to prove it happened, but it happened. In 1998, Frank Sinatra died at age 82. The obituaries mentioned everything: the music, the movies, the legend. But they didn't mention that night. Dave didn't talk about it publicly for years. But in 2004, during his final season on CBS, a reporter asked him about his most memorable interview. Dave didn't hesitate. Frank Sinatra, 1984, Valentine's Day. What made it so special? The reporter asked. Dave smiled. Because he was honest, and it changed my life. The reporter pressed. How? I called my mom that night from my dressing room before I even left the building. We talked for 2 hours. I told her I loved her. I told her I was sorry for being distant. We cried together. He paused. I did that every week after that, until she passed away. I never missed a call. Not one. Because Frank Sinatra taught me that fame doesn't mean anything if the people you love don't know you love them. But here's what Dave didn't tell that reporter. Here's what almost no one knows. That night, February 14th, 1984, Frank Sinatra went back to his hotel suite at the Plaza. His security team wanted to debrief. His manager wanted to discuss damage control. Frank waved them all away. He picked up the phone in his room and called Nancy, his daughter, the one he hadn't really talked to in over a year. She answered on the third ring. Dad? Nancy, it's me. I know it's late. I'm sorry, but I wanted to tell you something. What? Frank Sinatra, the man who never apologized, who never showed weakness, who built an empire on being untouchable, said, I'm sorry for everything, for not being there, for choosing the spotlight over you, for making you feel invisible. You deserve better. You deserved a father, not a celebrity. There was silence on the other end. Then, Dad, are you okay? I am now, babe. I am now. They talked for 3 hours about everything, about nothing, about childhood memories Frank had forgotten, about recitals he'd missed, about graduations where she looked for him in the crowd and he wasn't there. And at the end, Nancy said, I love you, Dad. Frank closed his eyes. I love you too, sweetheart. I always have. I just forgot to show it. After that night, Frank and Nancy spoke every week, sometimes more. He flew to see her, not for concerts, but just for dinner. He met his grandchildren and actually got to know them. He canceled tour dates to make school plays. In the last year of his life, when Frank was sick, Nancy was there, holding his hand. And the last thing Frank Sinatra said before he died was, thank you for giving me another chance. Nancy kept every letter he wrote her after that night, every birthday card, every I'm thinking of you note sent from random hotels around the world. And in a small box in her home, she keeps a VHS tape. It's the only copy of that late night NBC tried to erase, but a crew member made a bootleg. He gave it to Frank's people. They gave it to Nancy. She's never shown it to anyone. It's private, sacred, but sometimes, on Valentine's Day, she watched, and she sees her father, not the legend, not the chairman of the board, but just her dad being honest for maybe the first time in his life. And she sees David Letterman, a kid with curly hair and a crooked tie, giving her father the space to be human. That's the legacy of that night. Not the Emmy nomination. There were none. Not the ratings. They were decent but not spectacular. Not the headlines. Most ignored it. The legacy is this. Frank Sinatra got his daughter back, and David Letterman learned to call his mother. And somewhere in the middle of all the comedy and the celebrities and the late-night television machinery, something real happened. Something true. Paul Schaefer still has the sheet music from that night. The arrangement of The Way You Look Tonight he played during that moment. He's never played it again. He says it belongs to that night, and only that night. NBC executives tried to get Dave to recreate the moment with other guests. Get them to cry. They'd say, that's good TV. Dave refused. That wasn't TV. He'd tell them, that was life, and you don't fake that. The lesson of that February night in 1984 wasn't about entertainment. It wasn't about ratings or viral moments or Emmy reels. It was about two men, one old, one young, one famous beyond measure, one still building his career, both realizing the same terrifying truth. Fame doesn't keep you warm at night. Money doesn't call you on your birthday. Awards don't hold your hand when you're dying. People do. The ones you love. The ones you ignored while chasing everything else. Frank Sinatra spent 50 years being a legend, but it took one 30-minute interview with a nervous kid from Indiana to remember how to be a father. And David Letterman spent his career making people laugh, but it took one honest moment with a broken icon to learn what actually mattered. That's the story they never aired again. That's the moment NBC tried to bury. That's the night Frank Sinatra taught America that even legends cry. And sometimes, the best thing you can do with a platform isn't to entertain. It's to witness, to listen, to hold space for the truth, no matter how uncomfortable. Because at the end of the day, we're all just people trying to connect, trying to love, trying to matter to someone. And if Frank Sinatra, the toughest, most untouchable man in show business, could admit he got it wrong, then maybe the rest of us can too. Maybe it's not too late. Maybe there's still time. Maybe tonight, right now, you can pick up the phone, and maybe, just maybe, someone on the other end is waiting to hear that you love them.